Hello, welcome back to Nadya's Identity Files. I have with me the estimable, the prolific, the entertaining Tim Malone.
Yeah, I've been called all these things
Thank
and
you.
worse.
Uh-oh. Well, we won't get into the worst today. Those are like other parts of your identity we can explore on another episode, maybe like behind the scenes.
Right.
So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I definitely admire you and a lot of the work that you do with the Bridge program and your podcast, which I'm now definitely going to go back and do a lot of catch up on that. So on that podcast, I don't remember the episode number, but I learned a lot about your journey into academia. And do you remember the episode number?
Yeah, it's episode 16.2 of Shoot the Dancing Bear.
16.2, yes, of Shoot the Dancing Bear.
Yeah.
So obviously that was a long episode, and we don't have time to recount everything. Right. But if you could share a little bit of that origin story, that would be great.
Yeah, and so we were doing kind of a background of the hosts so that people listening to our podcast could get to know about what motivates us. And to kind of tell that story, for me, is a complex one. Identity is complex. But to go back through my history, there were some core touchstone events or experiences that I had that I think formed my identity as an academic or as maybe a radical philosopher. Some core experiences which kind of directed me towards radical ideas or ideas that are kind of out of the mainstream, but that I think are productive given our kind of contemporary situation. And so, when I was younger, I was kind of lacking direction in life, and I was kind of just a kid going along with the course of events that were laid out for me, just kind of riding the track that we're all kind of left with.
Yeah.
And I found myself experimenting with psychedelics and hallucinogens. I was probably about 20, and I was going to college at the time, but kind of purposeless. I didn't have a lot of motivation or explicit direction in life. And so I was experimenting. And one night I ate way too much acid. I ate probably like 10 times a recommended dosage of that.
Oh my God.
And I had a series of kind of profound, shocking, rather shattering revelations on LSD. It was one of the most terrifying nights of my life, yet simultaneously was also one of the most richly productive, creative, interesting, just in a kind of philosophical sense. And that kind of set me on this path where, because I had taken so much LSD, it took me a while to come down. I basically was stuck in an acid trip for like close to a year.
Wow.
And during that period of time, we don't really have adequate mental health facilities or treatment. I was eventually incarcerated, and it was during my incarceration when I really started to get philosophically interested, because I needed to kind of make sense of my own psychological experiences, my own spiritual experiences, the metaphysics of what had happened to me. And so I began this deep kind of introspective study of psychology, of the self, as well as kind of a bunch of different traditions out there, shamanistic, Eastern philosophical traditions that kind of spoke to the set of experiences that I was having. And from that, what eventually that turned into was an investigation of the world I found myself inhabiting. So I was incarcerated. I was sentenced to 9 years at 85%, so I had a lot of time. And I had this passion kind of lit within me to not only understand myself, but this radically different world that I found myself inhabiting that looked so different than kind of the mainstream, and that was constituted so differently. And by constituted, I mean the people I was around, different races, different genders, different class, a whole series of different identities.
Entirely different world.
And the world was inverted to some degree, because out here as a white heterosexual male, I'm privileged in society. And within the prison, I was a minority numerically. And I was running into people that in kind of my mainstream life I had never had relationships with, had experiences. And so what I needed to start doing was making sense. Why did the world I come from look one particular way? Why does the prison look like it's inverse? Why is it structured the way it is? And so that led me into a study of politics, a study of history, a study of critical race theory, to try to make sense of and to understand how the concretized prison, how this institutional form, not only how does it function in society today, but how did it get to look the way it does? How did throughout history, how does it track back to particular decisions made or particular historical realities that have led to a situation that we have this kind of shadow society existing, and not a lot of people know about it. It's pretty well driven into the unconscious of the collective psyche, the role that the prison plays in society.
So interacting with all of these different identities that you were not used to interacting with in your everyday, what did that do in terms of maybe not necessarily the reconstruction of your identity, but maybe the evolution or growth of your identity? How did you feel that the most?
Well, I think that the first thing, going back to the kind of the LSD, that kind of shattered my identity. A lot of what I took to be firm and grounded and truthful in the world, I realized was at play, and a lot of it was the social construction. And so having that kind of loosened or jarred allowed me then to begin to reconstruct an identity which was rooted in symbiosis with the people that I'm with, as well as with the texts that I'm ingesting and what I'm reading and what I'm learning. So it was this kind of radical suturing or restructuring of my very sense of self and kind of the relationships and the friendships I developed. You know, one of the things that I've learned kind of through this process is that identity is so fluid, and who we are is so very dependent on who we're with. And how we're viewed and the eyes through which we're gazed upon by the social body. And so one of the things that I learned is that my identity is multiple. You know, I am, you know, a white male heterosexual from the San Fernando Valley of a particular working class. But then simultaneously, if I'm driving down the 101 freeway and a police officer gets behind me, I'm an ex-con.
Right.
If I'm in the classroom, I'm an esteemed scholar. Or if I'm at Claremont. So, and like I described in the podcast, if I'm hanging out with my buddies and we're all being social, I'm a fun guy to get drunk with, right?
Right.
And I'm kind of like all these different people inhabiting this singular body. And what that has done for me is given me some freedom to construct who I am, in spite of all the forces that are arrayed against me or that are arrayed against any of us. And so how does one willfully become who one is or who one would like to be, having suffered at the hands of various institutional oppressions or social norms?
Right.
How does one actively create who one would like to be? And with the idea that that identity is relatively fluid and we can build that for ourselves.
Have you explored some of these issues? And I mean, obviously this is very existential, which is a branch of philosophical thought. Have you gone into some of these matters in your time being a professor at the Bridge program?
Yeah, I think that we explore these issues. We explore issues of identity and what is the self quite explicitly in Bridge. We look at kind of the range of philosophers in the Western tradition, you know, going back from Socrates and Plato all the way up to like the modern period with like, you know, Foucault and Derrida and Judith Butler, all who are asking questions about what does it mean to be human, what does it mean to be a self. And so we've explored these issues intellectually, but then one of the things that we do in Bridge that I think that's a little bit different than a lot of traditional educational environments is we try to ask you to bring who you are. I say this all the time to people, bring who you are, and we're going to meet you halfway with who we are. And we're all human beings, and although this information is somewhat abstract, if it stays abstract, it's dead. And when it becomes alive is when we as individuals digest the text and then bring all of who we are, all of that information, let that work together and become something, and then present it to a group
right.
of radical difference. And so we're consistently running up and confronting not only with ideas, people telling you who you are, but then how do you respond to those ideas? How do you transform that information to become more who you would like to be,
right.
Not only as an individual, but as a community or as a subset of a community or as the Bridge program itself? How do we all interact with this material? How do we all become more who we are? And how do we
There's like a hyper-awareness that's constantly available.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah, one of the things in Bridge, we try to make the invisible visible. We try to make the implicit explicit, meaning all those things. There's a lot of relations of power in society that tell us who we are,
right,
and what we can do and who we can be. And if we make those invisible things more visible, then people can become more conscious about their decisions and how much power they have in life to become who they want to be. Right.
You know, it's interesting to me because I feel like within all of these binaries in society, like there's all of these overarching paradoxes or underlying paradoxes, which, you know, it's just a lot of it just doesn't make sense. Yeah. You know, it all this sounds as though in the way that you unpeeled your identity with the LSD, you're to some extent unpeeling these traditions for people to realize their own identities in their own unique way. Yeah, I would hope that I can have some role in that for people. That's a journey that was very valuable to me. And I think that it's a core part of the Western philosophical tradition. All philosophical traditions really is trying to understand what is the self, to peel back, to develop some sense of authenticity, you know, and whether authenticity exists or not. You know, that's a postmodern philosophical question. Yeah, authenticity is like, what is authentic? Who defines authenticity? Right. And what I'm coming down to more and more, at least in my personal life and in my engagement in the Bridge classroom, is that we are those who define that question for ourselves, and we do that in relation with others. It's kind of a move away from the Western notion of the individual self, which is deeply packed within, like the little alien drive, you know, 2 inches behind your eyes driving around your body. We're moving. What I'm realizing more and more, especially in my work with Bridge, is that who we are is formed in relation with one another. And that's not to take anything away from our individual sense of self, which is true. That's not. You just can't get outside of it. You know, you are existing, right? But the interesting thing comes is when you begin to try out the boundaries of that in conversation, in relation, in partnership, and in community with others, and you stretch who you think you are. And you challenge just the overall notions of identity that you've been assigned by society. And of course, unfortunately, you know, we can't escape those assignments because we exist in the society that we exist in, but we can, you know, respond with, you know, our different actions. Yeah. In our creativity, in our desire, in our hunger. I basically come down on the a couple of perspectives that I've realized through Bridge. Is one is that people are generally pretty good, and people are creative. And given an opportunity, people want to develop, they want to grow, they want to be friends, they want to be in community with one another. And kind of given the opportunity to do that, there's this rich potential that emerges when you liberate groups of people and individuals to be able to explore their identity or to explore their engagements with the world. Because identity is so wrapped up with what you're doing. You know, and if you can give people you know, a very classic example of that is in Bridge we deal with a lot of people that haven't had a lot of success in school, that, you know, were kicked out of high schools or never got their GED or whatever, and they've got this identity of I'm stupid or I'm not capable. And then with the right energy from the program, with the right supports in place, you start generating successes for students, and their entire identity shifts. And sometimes what you get is this deep hunger for academia, something that which has been denied for so long. A whole new identity forms of somebody seeing themselves as capable, able to do the work, just as smart as anybody else. And what people realize, there are constraints based on race, based on gender, based on class that have kept people from being successful. And so if you can make those visible and say, this isn't you, this isn't your identity, right? It's just the institution. There's institutional factors here, and with
proper institutional investment, energy, engagement, and care. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your identity is. You can be successful in philosophy, which is what I'm responsible for. And some of those students, which have been most excluded, most driven out, most outsider identity, come with the most productive, invigorating and new ways of seeing the world from that very exposure to kind of the harshness and brutality which exists if you get driven out of the rationalized orbit of the way things are supposed to go. That's something else that I learned in prison, is that so much of our society is rooted in crushing our greatest resource, which is the rich potentiality existing in people. We've got this cookie cutter approach, and we bring everybody through and we crush everybody else and relegate them to the margins. But if you can mine those margins and work within those margins, you see new, flourishing, creative ways of being. And that's really interesting, because that's what we need now more than anything, is new ways of being in this world, which is just stuck in the status quo and just dying.
I feel like we are at the precipice of change in a positive way, but also I feel like it's kind of like it could go the direct opposite at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you're right on that. I think that it is a very interesting time to be alive.
Very absurd, indeed.
Absolutely.
But, fascinating at the same time, and I think that you're absolutely doing your part to really make an impact. With all of your various understandings that you've come into with your own identity and all of your work.
And you are as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So one last question I would like to know is, how long have you been with the Bridge program, and how did you find out about it?
I've been with Bridge for, I think, 5 or 6 years. Don't quote me on that. Maybe 6. I began actually as a TA in the program. After I was released from prison, I went to Antioch. I got my BA from Antioch. And I was an intern. I was a TA. And that was where my love affair with Bridge began. It was kind of in the classroom. And there was something tangible there, something that I had learned from prison about the potential within human beings that are excluded and marginalized. Bridge was attempting something which I hadn't seen at any academic institution that I was in, which is to take people seriously. No matter kind of where you come from, no matter where your background, you are capable of this work. And that was something that I had experienced in my own educational work in prison. And so Bridge was doing that. And then after I graduated with my BA, I went on to grad school, and I went to Claremont Graduate University. And at the time, the founder of the Bridge program, David Tripp, was getting ready to step back. And I had taken a lot of David's classes, and we had developed a friendship. And we had talked that at some point when my grad work was done, he'd like me to step in and teach philosophy in Bridge, so that he could step out and pursue other things, because he's like a seed planter.
That he is.
Yeah. And so he went on to do other things. He brought me in. They just kind of threw me to the wolves in front of a bridge.
Here you go.
Yeah. But instantly I was in my place. I just went, and I have a different understanding about philosophy and how it relates to people's everyday lives and the meaning they're making and the questions they're already asking.
Right.
And so if you can engage people on like a personal level around these questions and not make them abstract, not make them something you have to take a test for, but how does this impact you?
Right.
Like, what do you think about this? How is this relevant? And I don't care about a test. What I care about is the conversation we have around this stuff and how you think about this and how it impacts you.
That's how the real learning takes place.
Absolutely.
For sure.
And I think that's a methodology that we try to institutionalize in Bridge, is how do you make this stuff real, and how do you make this stuff meaningful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but that's how I heard about it. That's how I got involved with Bridge, and it's been no going back since then.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nadya.
For your time. And when we come back, we will do a brief round table with both Kevin and Tim.
Yeah, we'll put him on the spot and see if he remembers anything from philosophy.
Stay tuned, guys.